The Forgotten Town Beneath the Lake. I've always been fascinated by mysteries, the kind that make you question everything you thought you knew about the world. It's probably why I decided to become a journalist, to dig deep and uncover truths that others might miss. Little did I know that one day, I'd stumble upon a story that would not only consume my every waking moment, but would also lead me to question my own sanity. It all began in 1985 when I was assigned to cover a seemingly mundane event, the lowering of the reservoir at Lake Morton for maintenance work. It was a routine procedure, done every few years to inspect the dam and clean out the silt that accumulated at the bottom. But this time, something unexpected emerged from the depths. As the water receded, the outlines of structures began to appear, a submerged town that had been forgotten by time. I was there, standing on the shore with my camera, capturing the eerie sight. The remnants of buildings, streets, and even a church steeple slowly emerged from the murky water, like ghosts returning to the living world. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. How could an entire town be submerged and forgotten? I started asking questions, but no one seemed to have answers. The locals were just as baffled as you were, and the few historians I contacted had no records of any town ever being there. It was as if the town had been erased from people's minds and even history. Driven by curiosity, I decided to dig deeper. I spent hours in the local library, combing through old newspapers and archives. I discovered that the reservoir had been created in the 1950s, but there were no mentions of any towns being flooded in the process. It was as if the town had vanished without a trace long before the reservoir was built. My next step was to talk to the oldest residents in the area, hoping they might remember something. I met with Mr. Peterson, a 93-year-old man who had lived in the town his entire life. When I showed him the photos of the submerged structures, his eyes widened in shock. "That's Riverton," he said, his voice trembling. "I haven't heard that name in decades." I leaned in, eager for more. "What can you tell me about Riverton?" Mr. Peterson took a deep breath, as if summoning memories buried deep within his mind. Riverton was a small town, just a few hundred people. It was a peaceful place, until it wasn't. He went on to tell me about a series of mysterious events that had plagued the town in the late 1940s. People started disappearing without a trace. First, it was a young boy, then an elderly woman. Over the course of a few months, dozens of residents vanished. The town was gripped by fear, and rumors of foul play and supernatural forces spread like wildfire. The authorities tried to investigate, Mr. Peterson said, but they never found any clues. It was as if those people had been erased from existence. Eventually, the town was abandoned. People were too scared to stay. My family was one of the last to leave. I was just a boy then, but I remember the fear in my parents' eyes. I listened, captivated by his story. It sounded like something out of a horror novel, but the sincerity in Mr. Peterson's voice told me it was all too real. I thanked him for his time and promised to keep him updated on my findings. With this new information, I decided to explore the submerged town myself. I borrowed a small boat and set out on the lake, carefully navigating through the partially submerged structures. As I drifted over what was once Riverton, I felt a strange sense of unease, as if the town itself was watching me. I docked my boat near what appeared to be the remains of the town square and waded through the knee-deep water. The buildings were crumbling, overtaken by algae and aquatic plants. I could barely make out the faded signs on some of the storefronts. It was a haunting sight, a snapshot of a forgotten past. As I explored, I stumbled upon a half-submerged house that seemed relatively intact. I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The air was damp and musty, and the floor was slick with moss. I carefully made my way through the rooms, documenting everything with my camera. In what appeared to be the living room, I found an old chest. It was locked, but the wood was rotted enough that I managed to pry it open. Inside, I discovered a collection of old letters and photographs. The letters were dated from the late 1940s and told a harrowing tale of the town's final days. The residents wrote about the fear and paranoia that gripped Riverton, the search parties that went out every night, and the growing suspicion that something malevolent was at work. One letter, in particular, caught my eye. It was written by a woman named Margaret Adams, who described a chilling encounter with a strange figure that seemed to be watching her from the woods. She wrote about the feeling of being followed and the eerie silence that fell over the town at night. Her last letter ended abruptly, with a frantic scrawl, "They're coming for me. I can hear them outside. If anyone finds this, please remember us. Remember Riverton." I felt a shiver run down my spine. The desperation in her words was palpable, and it was clear that whatever had happened in Riverton was far more sinister than I had imagined. I carefully packed the letters and photographs into my bag, determined to uncover the truth. Over the next few weeks, I delved deeper into the mystery. I contacted paranormal investigators, crime historians, and anyone who might have insight into what had happened to Riverton. I even visited the state archives, hoping to find any records that might have been overlooked. One day, while sifting through old land records, I stumbled upon a document that made my heart race. It was a deed for a large tract of land, dated 1948, that included Riverton and the surrounding area. The land had been sold to a private company, Arcadia Development, for a substantial sum. The signature on the document was barely legible, but it bore the name of a man you had never heard of, Charles Abernathy. I decided to investigate Arcadia Development and Charles Abernathy. A quick search revealed that the company had been dissolved in the early 1950s, shortly after the reservoir was created. There were no records of any projects or developments attributed to the company, and Charles Abernathy seemed to have vanished from history. Undeterred, I dug deeper, eventually discovering an old photograph of Abernathy in a newspaper article from 1947. He was a tall, stern-looking man with piercing blue eyes. The article mentioned that he was a wealthy industrialist who had recently moved to the area with plans for a significant development project. I reached out to local historians, hoping they might know more about Abernathy. One of them, a professor named Dr. Evelyn Grant, responded to my inquiry. She invited me to her office at the university, where she had some old files that might shed light on the mystery. Dr. Grant was a sharp, elderly woman with a keen interest in local history. When I showed her the photograph of Abernathy, she nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, I've come across his name before," she said. Abernathy was known for his ambitious projects, but he was also quite secretive. There were rumors that he was involved in some questionable activities. I leaned forward, eager for more. "What kind of activities?" Dr. Grant sighed. "It's hard to say for sure, but some people believed he was conducting experiments. Psychological experiments, to be precise. He was fascinated by fear and the human mind. There were whispers that he had a private facility where he conducted his research, but no one ever found it." My mind raced as you connected the dots. Could Abernathy's experiments have something to do with the disappearances in Riverton? Was he responsible for the town's fate? I thanked Dr. Grant and left her office, determined to find out more about Abernathy and his experiments. I scoured old newspapers and public records, but information was scarce. It was as if someone had gone to great lengths to erase all traces of his activities. Then, one evening, as I was poring over old maps of the area, I noticed something peculiar. There was a section of forest near Riverton that was marked as private property. It was an odd place for private land, especially considering its proximity to the town and the reservoir. With a sense of trepidation, I decided to investigate the area. I packed my bag with supplies and set out early the next morning. The forest was dense and foreboding, and as I made my way through the underbrush, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. After hours of searching, I stumbled upon a dilapidated building hidden deep in the woods. It was an old, brick structure, partially covered in ivy and moss. The windows were boarded up, and the door was chained shut. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. I managed to pry the door open and stepped inside. The air was stale and cold, and the interior was dark and foreboding. I flicked on my flashlight and began to explore. The building seemed to be some kind of laboratory, with old equipment and machinery scattered about. There were shelves lined with dusty books and files, and the walls were covered in faded charts and diagrams. As I made my way deeper into the building, I found a series of locked cabinets. With some effort, I managed to break one open, revealing a collection of old journals. They were Abernathy's personal logs, detailing his experiments and observations. I sat down and began to read, my hands trembling with anticipation. Abernathy's entries were chilling. He wrote about his fascination with fear and his belief that it could be harnessed and studied. He had brought people to his facility, promising them money and safety, only to subject them to horrifying experiments. He described how he had manipulated the residents of Riverton, using fear to control them and observe their reactions. As I read further, I discovered that Abernathy had orchestrated the disappearances in Riverton. He had taken people from their homes, subjected them to his experiments, and then disposed of their bodies. He had covered his tracks meticulously, using his influence and wealth to ensure that no one would ever discover the truth. My heart pounded as I realized the enormity of what I had uncovered. Abernathy had been a monster, and Riverton had been his playground. I carefully packed the journals into my bag, knowing that I had to share this story with the world. Back in town, I began to write my article, detailing the horrors I had uncovered. I included photographs of the submerged town, the old laboratory, and excerpts from Abernathy's journals. I knew that this story would shock and horrify my readers, but it was a truth that needed to be told. As I finished my article, I couldn't help but think of the people of Riverton, whose lives had been destroyed by Abernathy's madness. I hoped that by bringing their story to light, I could finally give them the justice and recognition they deserved. The article was published a week later, and it quickly went viral. People were captivated by the mystery of the forgotten town and horrified by the revelations about Abernathy's experiments. The authorities launched an investigation, and the site of the old laboratory was secured as evidence. I received countless messages from readers, praising my work and expressing their condolences for the victims of Riverton. It was a bittersweet victory, knowing that I had uncovered the truth, but also that so many lives had been lost in the process. In the end, the story of Riverton became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the dark side of human nature. I continued my work as a journalist, always seeking the truth, but the memory of Riverton stayed with me, a haunting reminder of the forgotten town beneath the lake.
Be sure to subscribe to Edge of Your Seat Stories and click the notification bell for more captivating mysteries filled with intrigue, romance, and dynamic relationships. Please leave a comment below. Tell us of your stories. Until next time, dream big.